Well, good evening, everybody. This is John Craig,
And this is Sandy.
and it's good to be with you on this third day of the week here at Walking in Spirit and Truth.
You just walked in the house, literally. So we are officially like 2 minutes late. Is that the story of your life?
2 minutes?
No, not that word.
2-minute warning.
No, late.
Well, we're here. We're here and we're doing good, but I guess I got caught off guard because I saw a dead body chalk mark around on our sidewalk out front.
That's an excuse. That is completely an excuse because you weren't even here. Yeah, we were out doing Amariah and I were out playing on the sidewalk in chalk, and she laid down and she wanted to do Amariah. So I drew around her so it does look like a crime scene with a giant head because she kept moving. Yeah.
Well, I thought it was an alien. You captured an alien.
Yeah, it captured an alien's body.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, about 3 feet tall or less.
Well, anyway, we are glad that you are here tonight. Who are we? John and Sandi Craig. We have a congregation right here in Amarillo, Texas, Life of Worship. You can go, well, if you get it ready, you can go to www.lifeofworshipamarillo.org to find out more. And we have some things going on. Sukkot is quickly approaching. And yeah, we're still meeting. We're having Sukkot October 2nd through October 10th. Friday, October 2nd through Saturday, October 10th. And we want you to sign up and join us. We need to gather, and it's going to be great. You can get more information on that on our website, or you can contact us by email, or just let us know one way or the other. But the time is getting close where we need to have it all wrapped up. So what are we going to do? We're going to have great teachings and fellowship and archery and mikvah and maybe rededication and marriage. And we are going to have fun and a talent show. And with that cost too, meals, except for a couple in the evening meals, except for 2 are covered. And anyway, RVs, tents, you can stay the weekend. There's a hotel you can stay at. You can, all sorts of things. Anyway, let us know. Also, we have a prison ministry and a big prison ministry. And if you know someone who is in prison and you would like them to connect with us and they desire to connect with us, then, well, Joe, we need you here. I just saw that. That's not going to work. We need you here, Joe.
Please come.
Yeah. Anyway, so what was I saying?
We loved having you, Joe, and your mom with us this last year, and we would love to have you back again.
In fact, we're expecting that. So anyway, about the prison ministry, have them drop a line to us, but you can give us their information, their number, and their address as well, and we'll get in touch with them and connect with them. And okay, before we get started, I do have an Amariah story.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
You missed a day. She had gymnastics today, and she did balance beam. And here at our house, we have these concrete dividers between yards because it's going downhill a little bit. So it's to hold the soil in, I guess. But nonetheless, she loves to walk on them every day, and she balances and she holds her arms out and walks out on them. So they did balance beam, the small balance beam, like,
I can't see your hand.
I don't know, about 3.5. It's not 4, but anyway, inches wide. And she got up there, and she's so athletic. All the other kids struggle. She gets up there and she just do right across the way. And on the second time when she was doing it, this was amazing. She was on the balance beam towards the end. She jumped up like a real gymnast and then jumped down. My mouth was open. I couldn't believe it. She jumped on the balance beam, landed center in this 3.5-inch beam, and then jumped off. I was like, oh my goodness.
Did she do a?
No, she did not do that.
She didn't fling her hands up?
No. She just had fun. So, but all of us were like, oh my goodness. Anyway, that's my Mariah story that you didn't even know about.
I didn't know about that. So. First time I got to hear a story when everybody else did.
Well, I think you make that a habit. So I'm not feeling sorry for you at all. Did you want me to feel sorry for you? Well, it's not happening. Anyway,
No comment.
Is there anything else we need to announce? Oh, our services at Life of Worship. We are 2 p.m. Central on Zoom and 5 p.m. Central on YouTube Live. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Life of Worship Amarillo. Skip the O, or John Sandi Craig, or Amarillo. You can get there and subscribe to our channel.
Does it show it on our website?
Yeah, you can click on it on our website too.
Okay.
Yeah, I know it's probably easy, but you know.
I have a little tiny violin there, Joe, by the way. It's a tiny violin.
Oh.
Yeah. Thanks, Joe.
Yeah. Well, Joe, I will say this again. Sukkot is not going to be it's going to be good, but it's not going to be as good without you there. I need my partner in crime. Anyway. Okay. Well, did you have a quick news update on anything?
No.
No. Oh my. That's like a first.
Well, I have lots of news items or whatever in my head, but none of them are congealing enough to bring right now. But you could probably say something, and it'll probably jog something, and it's just going to come out like a torrent. So,
like a torrent.
Like a torrent.
Well, why don't you talk for a minute while I put my stuff together?
So
anyway.
One of the things that we've been tracking and just keeping an eye on is what's happening in our solar system. And one of the things that you may want to look into and research out as well and keep an eye on. And if you find out something, I would love to hear what you found out. But it has to do with what's coming up here in July, in the latter part of the month, probably somewhere around the 20th of July. If you have not been following this, there is an incoming binary system, and some call it Planet 7X.
Binary system.
Binary. Yeah, because it works with our sun. Every solar system is a binary system. So every solar system has basically two types of suns that, in simplistic terms, work with each other. And this system that's coming in is known as Planet X, Planet 7X, Nibiru, whatever you want to call it, the big goblin. It's coming in. And as it's coming in, when we go around the sun, there's 2 times a year that we come in alignment between it and our sun. And coming in the latter part of July, we will be on the front facing alignment with the planet. When it did this last year in July, there were a lot of big earthquakes that happened, and some big earthquakes in California. So we're watching that, paying attention that somewhere in the latter 2/3 of the month, that when we come into alignment with that planet, that we could see possibly some more very large earthquakes. Of course, there's very large earthquakes that have been just continually resounding around the world. But this is one that I'm watching in particular, as well as there's been quite an uptick in terms of fireballs. And fireballs are meteors coming in that have a certain amount of brightness and longevity. And so a lot of the fireballs hit the news. So, and a lot of them don't. A lot of them, the news doesn't pick up at all. But there have been several. And then the other thing that I'm keeping track of and watching, and that has to do with actual meteor strikes and insurance claims. That have to do with meteor strikes, where people turn in insurance claims when their house gets hit by a falling object called a meteorite. So hopefully we'll get some more information later on in the week on this one. And just be aware that what could be 5 or 6 incidents a month becoming 5 or 6 incidents a week, becoming 5 or 6 incidents a day to 5 or 6 incidents an hour, et cetera, et cetera. And as we go into the fall season, we're watching to see if this is what the frequency of these objects coming in. So just FYI, I just want to give you a heads up, because these are all part of the signs of the times that we're living in. And I think we're in for a bumpy ride in the latter half of the year, much more than the former half of the year. So
I think it's been pretty bumpy too.
And I don't know if you guys have been paying attention, but there have been an echoing or a resounding of prophetic words about things coming this fall from people that are unrelated to one another, of dreams and visions and things that the Father is showing people that have common elements that are resounding with each other. So we're paying attention very closely that during the fall season and the fall feast season could be very interesting, of course, leading up to the election and past beyond the election in November.
Well, Joe and Deborah, they are reporting some things here. Joe said the mask issue didn't pass in Toledo.
Yay, that's
but she
good.
also said, did you see the plane that supposedly was hit by hail with the nose and it had a huge dent? I hadn't heard anything about that.
No, I hadn't heard about that one, but definitely signs of the times are going on.
And then DeVore wanted to let us know that it's mandated to wear our police department or mandated to wear a mask, I'm sure, assuming, and they'll be enforcing, where are you from? And then Joe said, anyway, I mean, there's lots of, they're giving us the current news right here. BLM didn't show up for a Muslim police officer funeral. And then there's a new religion called anti-racism religion.
Another denomination to add to the 30 some odd thousand others.
It's probably anti-racism against certain groups, but not others. So, Louisiana.
Yeah.
Divorce from Louisiana. So,
yeah.
Wow.
Certain groups are more equal than others.
Yeah, that's right.
Like certain political parties are more equal than
others. Well,
in
Texas, that Governor Abbott, and I hope that he's doing something because he's getting a lot of pushback, has mandated that we wear one as well. I was so happy our state was a little bit more progressive, or at least not progressive, but
more freedom
oriented.
Yes.
In not wearing masks and not all this shutdown stuff. But then we backtracked this week.
Yep. Governor Abbott, coward, in my opinion, and apparently he's not talking to our lieutenant governor, because our lieutenant governor is opposing him regarding the mask.
Well, good for our lieutenant governor.
What's his name? Dan something. But nevertheless, so we have a division even within our leaders in our own state of Texas.
News. Joe said they have 4 council members that have been caught doing voter fraud, and one was arrested. They all need arrested.
Yeah, good for them. Good. Finally, there's that stuff's coming out. That we need that. We need to see that stuff taking place.
She says the Dems won't step down.
And one of the things I was thinking about on the way back to the house today is that isn't it interesting that they have all these alleged huge increases in cases of the CV, the Chinese virus, but isn't it interesting that they've really hyped up the testing, basically because employers are saying you can't come back to work unless you get tested. But they're making these people wear these masks. They're incubating this bacteria all day long. I wonder what they're going to be swiping with those testing kits if people are wearing their mask all the time. I mean, just think about
don't mask up,
like a self-fulfilling prophecy, if they want to really look at it that way. But nevertheless, they can make those numbers look however they want them to look. And in Texas, well, actually around the country, the CDC says, well, if you were in the same room as somebody else that tested positive, then you're also a case. And so they're counting.
No, they will automatically count you as a positive, even if they never speak to you.
Even if they never tested you. And if you have the sniffles, or you have an allergy,
or an upset stomach, or a headache, or an ache, or a pain, then you're COVID.
They're going to count you as COVID, even though they don't even have to test you for that. So if you want to know why there's explosions of numbers, that's because, and that's the reason. But on the other hand, what's it do? It's driving down the death rate, and which really makes it seem like it is certainly not a very dangerous.
Well, what we're trying
outbreak.
to do, the mask is. Wearing a mask does nothing for COVID. I will tell you that. Even the OSHA has come out and said the worst thing that the surgical masks are meant to wear only 30 minutes, and it doesn't block anything coming out of your mouth. It will block things coming in, but it will never block anything coming out of your mouth. And for 30 minutes, and it will not prevent any virus type anything, because they're too small.
Yeah, it's like
this is scientific stuff, guys.
It's
and then the cloth mask itself will breed so much bacteria that it will harm you. And we've got to remember that when we breathe out, it's how to get rid of waste. And so what you're doing is you're harming yourself,
incubating all that,
because the mask does nothing against a coronavirus or any virus for that matter. Nothing. And that's not from me. That's from doctor after doctor after doctor, scientists, and that's from OSHA itself.
Yeah.
That is from powers that be that said a mask will do nothing for you concerning this. Now you can wear it for secure but it also lowers your immune system, because we are meant to be outdoors. We're meant to breathe fresh air.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
I respect those who want to wear them, but it is not good for you. It will do you more harm than good.
Yeah. But everybody's
and it will not protect you in any form or fashion from the CV.
So I mean, everybody needs to make their own choice. They need to do what they feel like is best for you. And as for me, I only wear it if I have to get into some place and they said you can't get in without it. So
that's right.
And then I put slits in it so I can breathe.
And it's okay to disagree. We're Hebrew, so we don't have to agree on everything.
Yeah, exactly.
All we're doing is quoting scientific studies from scientists and doctors. So we don't have to agree if we're Hebrew.
Yeah, right. Look at it from different sides of the story.
We look at it from a perspective that we
and
put it
by the way,
shelf.
It's just a subject on the table. That's all it is. It's a subject on the table. So we can look at it from the different angles and pray about what's best for us, and we go on and we still love each other. That's the way we do it.
That's exactly right. Well, with that being said, we are going to talk more about worship tonight, and I want us to head towards Psalm 22:3. If you will pull that out.
Psalm 22:3. Okay, I get there. All right. Psalm 22:3 says, "Yet thou art holy, O thou art enthroned upon the praises of Israel."
Yes. Joe says it's part of the armor. Anyway. Yes, and I want to tell you that is just one version, because here are some others. But thou art holy, O thou that inhabits the praises of Israel. You are enthroned as the Holy One. You are the praise of Israel. Another version, but thou dwellest in the holy place, the praise of Israel. And another version, Young's, and thou art holy, sitting the praise of Israel. And of course, what we're looking at here is enthroned upon our praises. What does that mean? What does it mean to be enthroned upon our praises? Because it doesn't mean that Yahweh is sitting there waiting for somebody to worship to do anything. No. To you, what does that mean?
That he inhabits our praises? I think what it does is that it shifts the atmosphere. I think honestly that's what praise does, because all of a sudden one of the things it does is because we have so many distractions going on around us, like we're here talking about these masks, we're talking about all of the things that are happening in the world and stuff. There's so many distractions that are going on, and one of the things that praise does, all of a sudden it's like, and it puts us, and we begin to focus. It causes our whole spirit to focus where we need to be focusing. And so, and then once we're focused on him, what's he do? Not that he's not looking at us, facing us, or any of that, and that he's not always present, but all of a sudden his train, it's like his whole presence just comes and begins to fill the place. Just
imagine his robe, his train filling the temple.
Yeah.
It
is, and in his presence is shalom.
And there's shalom. Well, I was reading as I was studying this out. One person put it in the perspective, if somebody from the outside, we said, well, God inhabits our praise, or God is enthroned in our praises. He said it like this, that they may see it, that when we praise God, God finally steps into the middle of the praise session, and like a sponge, he closes his eyes and soaks it all up, and somehow this empowers him or induces him to perform miracles. And I've never seen it this way, whether I would call myself Christian or anything else. I've seen it as, think about us when someone sits there and a mom or a dad or a child, when you were a child, and someone begins to pray, to say, wow, you've done a great job. Now and I'm not saying that's what we need to say to God. I'm not saying it like that, but there's something that happens in that relationship. Like if we're at example today, when Amariah did something at the gym, at gymnastics today, I just told her good job, and her face just lit up and she wanted to do more. And, think about this. When your kids are honoring you and obeying you, you want to pour out to them.
Well, it's like his greatness is revealed. His goodness is revealed. It's all of a sudden, it's like there could be all sorts of chaos and confusion or something. Could be just a lot of just distractions and talking. But when the praise comes in, and then as our hearts begin to shift, all of a sudden his greatness begins to overwhelm everything. And truly, it's like he comes and sits on his throne in where we're at.
Exactly.
And not that he isn't already there, but he just, boom, his sovereignty is real.
He pours out. Well, I want us to examine the word Yashab. It's YASHAB, and it's number H3427. And I want us to look at this word just a little bit, because this is the word for inhabit or enthroned here. And it can mean to dwell, to remain, according to Strong's, to marry, to continue, to inhabit, to a place, to return, to seat, to set. Now, but I want us to break it down in the Paleo and see what we get here, because when you look at the Yod, it's like a big white fence, or purple or blue scarlet gate, and it's like a hand that works to create or make. And we think about, who is the hand that worked to create and make? Of course, it's Yeshua, who created all things, Yahweh. You also think of the arm, the hand, the work, the thrust, the deed to make flow. You also think in a Yod as worship. So when you bring some of this together with the Yod, his right hand is upon us, and he shapes and molds us into his image, and he's created all things, and he's working all things together for good, his hand. And when you look at the Sheen, what do you have? Of course, you have the Sheen in its teeth: eat, consume, destroy, bite, change, divide, repeat. It can be, he can also mean that consuming fire, who is Yahweh himself, and returning to him, the El Shaddai, that his fire is refined as his own, as we become more like him, but his enemies are consumed by the fire. All right. And then we bring it to the bait. And the bait is a picture of the house or the tent, and meaning the house or the family or the dwelling place. And it's the first letter in the Torah, and it identifies the son of Yah. So when you're thinking about him, that he is working and creating, Yeshua, who created all things to shape us and mold us, working for our good, because he's the roaring lion who will consume our enemies as he purifies us, and in the house, because he's our dwelling place when we're in the house. That's part of the picture of Yeshab. So when we say Yeshab, enthroned, let's look at where else we see that word. Let's look at Genesis 13. We'll start with verses 6 and verse 7. Genesis 13, verses 6 and verse 7. And that's right. Tova says when she praises or proclaims, she senses the smile, and it's tangible. I agree with you. I agree with you wholeheartedly.
So Genesis 13, 6 and 7. And the land could not sustain them while dwelling together, for their possessions were so great that they were not able to remain together. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Avram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. Now the Canaanite and the Perizzite were dwelling then in the land.
Okay, now go to verse 12.
Avram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled in the cities of the valley and moved his tents as far as Sodom.
So here we see with Abraham and Lot, that because of the growing size, they were in conflict. They were both trying to inhabit and control the land, but there was room for only one. So we see one aspect of this word, but Yeshav also means to be enthroned and speaks of authority as kings. So to look at that, let's go to Psalm 122:5, because you think of a king, and we think of enthroned Yeshav, and all a king being enthroned, and that's what that picture is of that verse that we get when we're just looking at it, even just on the surface level. But it's so much deeper, because what is Yah doing on that throne?
So Psalm 122:5.
Yes.
For their thrones were set for judgment, the thrones of the house of David.
All right. So in that we see that we're using that word enthroned, and we're also looking at it's connected to judging and presiding over court cases. Now jump over to Psalm 9:8.
9:8.
So there's judgment involved in Yeshab. So think about that. Being enthroned, he also is seated as a judge. So could he be examining our hearts, the real motivation for why we worship? Are we up there just giving back to him superficially because everybody else is doing it? Are we truly bringing him that sacrifice of praise? I don't know. It's something to think about, because here we see that as a king is enthroned, he's going to judge. What does that say?
And he will judge the world in righteousness. He will execute judgment for the peoples with equity.
Okay. So again, we see this concept of judgment. Now let's go back. I know I'm giving lots of scripture. Let's go to Psalm 99:1.
Okay. Psalm 99:1, which reads, Yahweh reigns, let the peoples tremble. He is enthroned above the cherubim, the cherubim. Let the earth shake.
He's enthroned above them. Is it almost like how would you picture that? He's enthroned above the cherubim.
I mean, it's just really, it's just that place of dominion and authority is the way I look at it. I don't know. What are you looking for?
Well, if he's throned above them, are they carrying him? Are they ushering him in? His presence in? I don't know. It's just a thought. It's something to think about and picture that. Isaiah 37:16 says, O Yahweh of hosts, the God of Israel, who's enthroned, Yeshab, above the cherubim, you are God. You alone of all the kingdoms of the earth, you have made heaven and earth. So what does it actually mean that God is enthroned in our praises? Because the word states that he is what? King of kings and Yah of Yahs, right? It states he is the supreme in the universe. And we need to understand that in light of the fact that we're in a kingdom against kingdom battle. Let's jump over to 2 Corinthians 4:4. Because who has control of a lot of this earth? Who is that? A lot of the people, a lot of the earth. It's a kingdom against kingdom thing that's going on before us at all times.
I was just thinking about that. Have you ever heard that phrase?
I like what Tova said, kind of like the priest carried the ark. And I have a theory on how the poles were carried. I wish we could put her on so she could tell us the theory. Thank you, Tova. I'm going to put that up. Go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt.
So I was just thinking about how, have you ever heard the phrase, praise looks good on you?
Yes.
So when Yahweh's people are praising him, it literally changes their countenance. So think about how...
Well, that's what Tova said earlier. She could feel the tangible presence, the smile.
Yeah. So isn't that like the bride adorning herself?
Yes.
To make herself beautiful before the bridegroom? Absolutely. And it's all part of the preparation of getting her ready. Because what does the praise do? It changes the attitude of the heart. Because sometimes we carry around a lot of burdens that we shouldn't. But when we praise, that stuff can't stand. It can't stay on us. And a lot of times it'll just start to break off or fall off. And because you think about it, it's like wearing a muddy necklace or, something that's just, not good. But you would think that's unpleasant to look at, and the praise just kind of causes that stuff to crumble off and to fall
Joe
off.
says
And
it's her fragrance.
it's the fragrance. Yeah, that's a good way to say it too. It's the fragrance. It's the aroma that attracts the bridegroom.
Yeah. And I love that picture, and the picture of praise. Praise looks good on you. Praise. I even love the idea, the fragrance, because how often in worship there's been a scent that's been released, a literal heavenly scent. Vanilla, smokes. People have smelled smoke before. Just all sorts of fragrances that come forth too. Not all the time, but it does happen. And I think it's very fascinating. I'd love to do a study on that too. Any more on that anyway.
Right.
But let's look at 2 Corinthians 4:4.
All right. So this one reads, in whose case the God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelieving, that they might not see the light of the gospel of the glory of Messiah, who is the image of God.
Okay. What has Hasatan always wanted more than anything?
He wants to be enthroned. He wants to be king.
He wants worship. He wants to be worshiped.
Yeah.
Somewhere to him having all the instruments contained within him and the beauty that he has, he wanted more, and he still does want more. He wants the worship. Ultimately, he wants our destruction and things, yes, but he wants worship. And that's why worship is so integral, and that's why it's so important that we do worship. But it is, as I said before, it is a kingdom against kingdom issue. Tova says Yeshua will know us by our fragrance, and we will know him by his. Hallelujah. Smell sandalwood. Sandalwood is worship. I'm going to keep that on there. But when we remember that it is a kingdom against kingdom battle, and that worship is integral, it's an integral part of that, because Satan wants our worship. So who are we going to give worship to? Those who say, I'm not going to worship, I'm not going to participate, I'm just going to study. Well, we're going to worship something, and we've got to give him back the glory. But
so my question is I don't mean to break your thought there, but can one remain neutral in worship?
I don't think so.
So
because it has always been a sacrifice of praise. It's like our Olah offering. It is supposed to involve all of us. We're supposed to be burning ones on the altar. That means we lay our whole self on the altar.
So if one is saying, well, I'm not going to worship, y'all can worship, I'm just going to sit here or whatever, in other words, taking a stance of being neutral, when in reality they're not being neutral to worship, they are actually opposing worship. I mean, that's what I'm thinking. I mean, what do y'all think in the chat room? If someone tries to remain neutral, then are they actually preventing worship? Are they becoming a obstacle within worship by resisting worshiping our King? It's a thought.
It is a thought. I just think we've got to bring this topic. Brad Scott's been talking about it for the last several years, and so have several other people, including us. Worship has to become a part of our life, but we need to understand it too. Understand its power, understand what's happening in the midst of it. Because so many times we even find that word strive, that my spirit shall not strive with man forever, because he is also flesh. Nevertheless, his days shall be 120 years, back in Genesis 6:3. It is said at some point, at that point, and that's when Yah sort of handed everything over. We also know that, he divorced us at the golden calf incident. There's so much more where there was a separation, because we choose to worship something else. We choose to worship something else or someone else. And I think in this day and this hour, though, actually it's both, because it can be our own families. It can be so many things. We're going to worship something.
Yeah.
So when we look at Yahweh being enthroned in our praises, something is really interesting that's taking place, because what I see happening in part is that we are taking Yahweh's supreme authority in heaven, and it's coming down. In other words, worship went the worshipers went in battle first because it brought confusion into the enemy's camp. If he's enthroned in our praises, that same concept is happening. And praise doesn't have to happen corporately. It should happen all day, every day. I mean, but special times even set apart. Prayer, worship, and proclamation, they all go hand in hand. They're part of the arsenal, our arsenal to defeat the enemy. And without those things, we're going to be tossed around. And so it literally, I picture, just like that says, is that his authority is now reigning over all the circumstances around us, because our focus and our gaze is now upon him. It's not upon the distractions, or the voice of the enemy is not the distinct voice in our head telling us we can't, or the situation's insurmountable, or whatever. Our gaze is focused on him, and then his authority reigns over everything. It's not the God of this world any longer. It's his. He is positioned. We have positioned him, allowed him to come into our lives in order to work. And I say that because our focus then is purely upon him, because in our busyness and in our lives, that everything else is positioned before our eyes, and we take hold of things so often, and God can't work because we're holding them so tight. But when we worship, we let go, because to get through the eye of the needle, everything must be removed from us to go enter his court, enter his gates with thanksgiving, and enter his courts with praise. We've got to remove everything to go through that eye of the needle, and then our focus and gaze is upon him, and then he is the authority in our lives, and the authority that is in the atmosphere. And that's why we see so many signs and wonders happen through worship, during worship time.
Well, you mentioned something that was very interesting, and I have two thoughts in my mind right now. So I'm going to say the first one before I forget it. What did we learn when we became Hebrew? Did we understand Shabbat when we first came into Hebrew roots? Did we understand
in its fullness?
Yeah. Did we understand the feast days
in their fullness?
Did we get that? But how did we get to understand them? It was by the doing, right? It's by doing it every day. We might not have full understanding, but we're going to do it. And we're going to we know all these other people, they're doing it, so we're going to do it too. And then it starts to make sense. Things start to clarify and to gel. And so what happens if we are a doer of worship? We may not even understand the power of worship, but when we begin to do it, we're actually doing the very same thing as we learned when we started to do the Torah portions, when we started to do the Shabbats, when we started to do the feast days, when we started to do these things that are a part of our biblical heritage. But on the other side that I wanted to talk about was Sandy, you talked about when we begin to worship, it's like we're pulling heaven down. And I got the picture of the woman with the issue of the blood, of her reaching out to grab a hold of the corners or the seats of Yeshua's garment. Think about this. Now think about that picture, and then go back to Malachi chapter 4 and read this. Chapter 4, verse 2. But for you who fear my name, the Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in its wings, and you will go forth and skip about like calves from the stall, and you will tread down the wicked, for they shall be ashes under the soles of your feet on the day which I am preparing, says Yahweh of hosts. So what's it say? You fear my name. How do we express the fear of his name? It's in worship. When we are reverent before him, we're expressing his kingdom, his glory, his power, his majesty, all of that. And then it says, and the Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in its wings, literally the wings of the prayer shawl. That's the corners of the prayer shawl by which the woman with the issue of blood grabbed a hold of, where the seats are. And from there, then healing flowed. The virtue of healing just began to flow from Yeshua. And he said, who touched me? literally bringing his presence in when we touch him like that. And then what was the next thing that says? Then you'll go forth and skip about like calves from the stall. And like I hear a dance coming on, it's just, you get happy feet, things start to happen. Praise level begins to increase. And then what's the next thing? Then he releases authority. He releases authority within our own lives, because then we're treading down the wicked, and they're under our feet.
Under our feet.
And so it is this whole concept that when we become Hebrews, we may not understand the concept of some of these things within Scripture, but worship is more than studying the Scriptures themselves. David demonstrates that for us as he brought and ushered the ark into Jerusalem, and he was had removed all of his clothes except for the ephod, and he was dancing before Yahweh with all of his might, even to the point that his wife was ashamed that a king would be so humbled like that before the people. And he said, I'll even become more undignified than this. But it was in the doing of it, when we are in the midst of the practicing, the practicing of his presence, you might say. But it's in the doing is what causes us to be able to reach, to very touch his very garment, where his presence comes down, and things just begin to change. Things begin to shift. And I'm telling you, worship, well, you know what happened when you were gone, Sandy?
No, you haven't talked to me.
Yeah. So, and this is just me, and I know people are in different places, but we just did some old praise choruses.
Like what?
Like, come, let us worship and bow down. And I love you, Lord. And just some old praise choruses that we have. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Just things like that. Very simple. Those were things that captured my heart way back after I first became a believer. But we just did some really simple songs like that. And nothing complicated, not trying to figure out a wordy song or anything like that. Not that there's anything wrong with wordy songs. It was just very simple songs.
And
so that his presence came, the sweetness of his presence came and filled the place. And there was just a great shalom and a great peace that came into the house. And at least that's where I was. I don't know about anybody else, but, think about what it can do. It was those simple praise choruses when I was a young believer that allowed me.
And that's the 80s.
Yeah. That allowed me to experience worship, because it just caused things to be so simplified in his presence. And my heart was stilled and my heart was focused. And it was in that I learned about the intimacy that brings. And literally, when the intimacy comes, then the heart begins to be softened. And then, and when the heart becomes softened, we just start to, all of that junk, it just starts to fall off. And sometimes that junk just falls off in a rush of tears and just whatever. I mean, some people react in different ways, but it's because we begin to see his loving kindness and his mercy. And it causes our heart that's been hardened to become still before him and experience that mercy.
Well, I like what Toa said. She said, he's on the throne with angels flying around saying, Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. The praisers are leading into battle with the two cherubim on the ark, absorbing the frequency of the words. It is his earthly throne. See, I love that. So you have the picture of the ark, but here we also have the frequency of the words. Guys, when you are singing, just like when you pray, you've heard me say it over and over, don't pray silently, pray out loud. Proclaim that word out loud. Use the same voice, that tool that he's given you to call things that are not as though they are. But when we're praising, when we're singing, when we're worshiping, we've got to be careful, because you can't just sing a song for a song. When any worship leader puts together a set, they should be praying and saying, Father, what would you have us declare, and what would you declare over us today? It should be that. It shouldn't just be a set of songs, because all of that then is, you might have worship that's entertaining, but it's all just filler. And you don't want filler worship. You don't want filler worship. You want worship that's full of the point that you are saying his words. That's why you even got to watch what you're saying in your songs. I know my mom loves some of the old hymns, and I like some of the old hymns too. But when she started examining the words you speak when you say some of those things, she was like, oh, I can't sing that anymore. And I said, you got to be careful what you are proclaiming. And that doesn't even include hymns. That's all the music. I don't want filler music in our worship services. And when I say worship services, that means the preaching, the teaching, our gathering together, anytime we come together. I don't want filler. I want things that draw us in. But even in worship, you get to that place. I don't know if you guys have experienced it, but you hit a song. So if you've had a worship leader that's in, or God's moving and they've really sought him about what to do, all of a sudden you get to, there's one breaking point or a breaking point in the midst of worship. And you're like, you can just feel his presence ushered in. You know, sometimes, and I'll be honest, a lot of times the hindrances in worship services are the people that are out before you. In fact, that's a lot. When we have conferences, I note a big difference in how worship goes. But I'm not going to gravitate there right now. But all of a sudden, it's just like the river begins to flow. And that's where you're supposed to be. You don't worry about the rest of your list or whatever. The whole point is to get to that place, that breaking place, that where that river flows. And then you sit there and you rest there. And I it's that moment where you feel his presence. There's been times like, I gave you, for instance, once when that man gave that word in did he give it in tongues initially at Lamar Boschman's message at Christ for the Nations?
Yes.
And then it was interpreted and a hush fell over and you were done for. But it also happens, you can have somebody in a congregation spontaneously give a song of the Lord, that song of the Lord, sing with new words. And the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, falls so heavily in the congregation that even the sermon, the message, the rest of the music, it all becomes filler, because that's the point. That's the point where you need to rest. That's the point where that intimacy is at. And I'm not saying you don't go further. And sometimes you can continue that. You just got to be sensitive and discerning with, what is the Ruach saying at that moment. But what an amazing time. If you've never experienced that in worship, your congregation doesn't have it. I encourage you to help bring that in, because it's so important. Because in a true moment of praise and worship, Yahweh is enthroned and his presence will fall. And when it happens, that authority is right there. We can think about Paul and Silas. They were in prison. They were in jail because they cast out a demon out of a slave girl. And what did they do? They were put in chains, and that had to have hurt just even in that. But instead of looking at their circumstances and that we've done nothing, they said, enough of the world's authority over us. Enough of the world saying this and this and this. This is who you are. This is what you have to live through. This is what you have to suffer through. No, we're going to let Yahweh Supreme reign over us in his authority, and whatever he decides is good for us. And that's what happened. And what ultimately happened? The chains were gone.
Chains fell off. The doors were open.
Their guards were astonished and came to know him, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
But that means, remember, it doesn't have to be. He's not just enthroned in our praises or our worship in the midst of a congregational setting.
No, it's true. And I think about this too, is, when we have come into our Hebraic heritage and understanding a lot of these things, not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but how many times do we look at some of these congregations where they have, they're not up there just singing songs. There's vibrant worship that's going on, that there's an excitement in worship when people are really expressing their hearts before the Father. And I liken it to the times that we've been to Christ for the Nations in their worship times, where there's a wholehearted just worship before God, full devotion. It's an amazing shift. Think about it, what happened that one time, Sandy, when we went to the worship conference. And the year before, they'd had all these people. They were down front praying in and ushering the presence of God before the
it starts
service.
with the kids. It used to start with the kids.
And then that one time I was like, there's nobody down here. There's nobody preparing. And
I want to give them a picture first. The young people, these young adults at the Christ for the Nations, and it's not just young adults, it's others too. But worship practice starts 2 hours before, a good hour, because you just got to do sound, etc. And about an hour or in, the kids begin to pray and intercede.
So the ones that are not part of the practice and worship team and all that sort of stuff,
we're just 3 or 4. We're talking 40, 50, 100
young people coming down in front and beginning to pray.
Pray earnestly.
Not just, oh, God bless the service.
They are interceding.
They're interceding. We want the presence of God to come.
That in itself, that prayer in the midst of that worship practice going on, sometimes that in itself would just usher in such an amazing, the amazing anointing and presence of Yahweh and his authority. And sometimes there was never a shift. You would go from that. And we've done it at Life of Worship too, where you're praying, where you're proclaiming, and practice is happening. And all of a sudden it's not practice anymore. Services started, and there was no because
no official start time.
No, because it was the presence of Yahweh was already so heavy. And anyway, that's beautiful. But what happened is this time the kids weren't there for some reason. I'm not sure what it was, but the kids weren't there.
There wasn't the, I don't know if it was the passion, the energy that year, like it was in the prior year. There were special things that were going on in the prior year, just amazing things, but it wasn't there that year. And I was like, oh, it's missing. And I'm longing for this. And we need to usher this thing in. We need to pray. And so I just went down front and I began to, because that's the open area, is that front altar area and in front of the stage. And I began to pray and just began to intercede. And shortly, one person, and then 2 people, and 4 people, and 8 people, started joining me down to the front. We were praying. We were all calling out to God to move, and we were all worshiping. And the worship team they were still doing their practice behind us and all that type of thing. But then the presence of God hit. And the worship team was no longer practice. I think it started probably 15, 20 minutes early, that the worship hit the stage where the worship team was and the instrumentalists and all of them. And the worship just started from there. And people that came on time, well, they were coming in thinking it was getting ready to start. It had already started. It was just amazing.
It's always amazing. It's not a one-time incident. It was
just such a powerful. But what spoke to me was the volumes of how we as people, whether we have music or we don't have music, it's our voices crying out to God in worship and in intercession, and all of that lifting him up brings his presence in. So much, and we cannot neglect it, especially in the day and the hour that we're living in. We cannot neglect this powerful, powerful ministry that we have when we use our voices. And we're not ashamed to use our voices in front of people. It's actually can be very contagious. Mm-hmm. And because people are like, I wish somebody would step up there, or I wish I could do something like that. Well, we can, and we ought to. And that is because it is a ministry that goes first. It goes before everything else.
Absolutely. But I don't want to forget, I have a whole bunch more pages on this because I wanted to look at it from some other aspects. But I want us to remember when we discussed it, some of it a couple weeks ago, but the second aspect of enthroning God in our worship and praise always involves spiritual warfare. Tova's mentioned it. We've already touched on it briefly, but I want to officially mention it. when the armies of Moab and Ammon and the Ammonites joined in battle to battle Judah. What did we discuss the last time? King Jehoshaphat called on God and a prophet, and he delivered a word. 2 Chronicles 20:17. You need not fight in this battle. Station yourselves. Stand and see the salvation of the Lord on your behalf. O Judah and Jerusalem, do not fear or be dismayed. Tomorrow, go out to face them, for the Lord is with you. And what happened the next day? Jehoshaphat ordered the temple singers to go before Israel's army, praising Yahweh. And 2 Chronicles 20 verses 20 through 21. Let's turn there real fast. 2 Chronicles 20 verses 21 through 22. Sorry, 21 through 22.
All right.
And Tova, thank you for that information. I wrote down that book in great anticipation. So
And when he had consulted with the people, he appointed those who sang to Yahweh and those who praised him in holy attire, as they went out before the army and said, Give thanks to Yahweh, for his loving kindness is everlasting. And when they began singing and praising, Yahweh set ambushes against the sons of Ammon, Moab, and Seir, and Mount Seir, who had come against Yehudah, and they were routed.
So while they were praising Yah, he sent an ambush against the invading armies. When you're praising him, he sets an ambush against the invading armies. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Psalm 50:23 says, He who offers a sacrifice of thanksgiving honors me, and to him who orders his way out, aright, I shall show the salvation of God. You know, it's just so important. But I also find the aspect, we've got 2 minutes. I want to discuss what it means to sit. I want to look at this from a different direction and go into a lot more detail. And it looks like we're going to have to do it next week. Because we see this word enthroned also meaning sit. And we've talked, what does that mean? I'll ask you this question. Is it the Yahweh that inhabits the praises of his people, or is he the praise of his people? And is it his people? Because it really says Israel. So what does that mean? Is he the praise, or does he inhabit the praise? Or is it, as Halissa would say, yes? Because it's both. And I want to discuss that, as well as I want to discuss refuge and batak, that refuge, that security that also happens, that David so much mentions in scripture and in the midst of praise and worship. So I think we're at a turning point for this week, and I want to thank you guys for joining us. And I'm excited that we get to see each other next week. Remember everything I said earlier in the show with the inmates, with our Sukkot and our services. We are so glad that you stand there with us, and that you're part of our family anyway.
Yeah. Boy, that inmate list is growing, and so we appreciate that. We just do want to say, if you want to be part of that, the prison ministry, and help support that and the costs for sending out materials to these guys.
Materials, we also support them other ways.
Yeah, food and because
necessities. And
we found out that because of the COVID lockdowns and stuff, these guys are getting one meal a day in some of the prisons.
When they're locked down in some of the prisons in Texas, they get what they call a Johnny. I found that out today, yesterday, a Johnny. And sometimes they get a Johnny one time a day, and it's usually peanut butter and jelly. And that's the food for the day. Yeah. When they're locked down.
When they're locked down. So they get one meal.
Now, that does not supposed to happen. Jonathan informed me very much that where he's at, that does not happen. But it does happen because I speak to these guys too. They call me on the phone and John on the phone, and we're able to talk with them and minister to them. And that is definitely happening in some of the places. Yeah.
Yeah. So please be praying for those that are locked up. There's so many that have come to their Hebraic roots of their faith, and Yah has used their incarceration for that.
I have to tell a testimony real quick, and I know it's past time, or it's at time. I was talking with one of the guys that Jonathan's ministered to, that's now moved on, that we're ministering to. Amazing man. And that kid, he's 29 years old, and that kid has a calling on him, a huge calling on him. Just his there's anointing on this kid. Anyway, he was asking me a little bit of background, and I told him specifically that, all the experts that the prosecution normally uses said our son should not go to prison. And normally they follow those words by the experts, the psychiatrists, all of that, without fail. And this time they didn't. They said it's because you're a fringe church, because we're Hebrew roots. And I told him, I said, Jonathan wouldn't be there if it wasn't for us, John and I, doing what we do. And he stopped me right there. He says, no. He says, Jonathan had to go for me. He said, and he had to go, and he started listing the names of the men who Jonathan has touched. He says, Jonathan had to be there because he came because of us and for us. He says, without him, I would be so lost. I wouldn't, and so would. And he, like I said, he listed off this big trail of names of men. And he said,
that have been touched because of Jonathan.
He had to go for us. That is why he's there. And it's so touching,
as much as, and it's hard for us to want to say that, we see the injustice from our point of view, that the Father had a purpose that needed to be fulfilled. And he chose to use Jonathan to do it. And as a result, there's dozens of men.
More than that. I mean,
that are being touched because of that ministry.
And each of these men have their own study now that they're doing. So you have 10, 12, even 20 men with each of these men.
Yeah. And think about this. And of all the different places, Jonathan has been placed in a transfer unit, which means no one's supposed to be there permanently. It's just until a particular location it opens up for them to go to, and they decide where they want to send them to. And so this transfer location is where people come in and out all the time. So they're crossing Jonathan's.
He's like at the crossroads to touch men's lives.
And they come in, they connect, and then they go out differently. And this is an amazing, amazing thing. We want Jonathan home. His wife needs him. His daughter needs him. And the Father will have that covered too. He's going to take care of that aspect. But in the midst of it, what has been broken, seems to be a shattering of things, that the Father says, no, I still am supreme in this situation. I am supreme, and I'm going to have my way. And I'm going to use Jonathan to do it.
And so you guys continue to pray for all of them, but specifically also pray for Jonathan. We want him home. There's been prophetic words that he's coming home shortly. We're still believing that, and it would be a miracle because he officially doesn't come up for parole till August of 21. But there's just been a shift. But bottom line is, we want Yah's will, not our own. And so if Yahweh has other plans and purposes, yes, we want that done first. When he's supposed to come home, we want him home.
Yes.
So anyway, continue to pray for us for that. And thank you for supporting us in the congregation at Life of Worship and the ministry that we do. And we consider you part of that as well. And anyway.
So if you want to connect with us on Zoom for our Torah portion on Shabbat, you need to email us so we know, and we can connect with you.
We'll send you the link.
And otherwise, we'd also love to hear from you. If you'd like to support this ministry at Life of Worship, you can go to our website. You can see it as part of our email there. We had it up earlier, www.lifeofworshipamarillo.org. And you can go online and support us financially. And anything and everything helps. It's really a blessing when you do. So we certainly appreciate your generosity.
Thank you. Anyway, that is it for today. We will see you next week, and we will continue this discussion.
Yeah, and it was good to be back with you all. this week. It's been a little bit. So,
Well, we were on a week. We were gone, and then we were on a week, and then I had to leave town.
Yes.
So 1 week. So,
all right then. Well, until next time, this is John Craig.
And this is Sandi.
Shalom.